In the months leading up to our big degree show, students were given an open brief. Essentially, we could do whatever we wanted, solve any problem we wanted. So what was I going to create? Well, I knew that I loved words and letter forms, so I set my sights on inventing a new language. But the deeper I delved into this, the more frustrated I became. In looking at examples, I found out Esperanto was meant to unite the whole world under one easy-to-learn language. Ladan was a feminist thought experiment created to make the world imagine what language would look like if it had evolved from a matriarchal society. Tolkien loved constructing languages so much that he created Lord of the Rings to give his Middle-earth dialects a place to exist, and not the other way around. But it's taken me 2 decades just to scratch the surface of English and chat to my grandparents in broken Mandarin. How was I going to fabricate and manipulate a whole new grammar structure? And what would my new symbols look like for an alphabet? What would they represent? Would they be sounds or words or concepts? And why? And so all these questions built up and started to feel arbitrary. And arbitrariness, that's just the opposite of good design. And the thing is, design isn't about making things. Craft and creativity are a huge part, but at its core, it's about problem solving and communication. So as I thought about that more, my question morphed from what do I want to create into what's a problem that's worth solving. So I began to consider the rapid extinction of languages in the world today. As fascinating as artificial languages are, they often lack the organic history of natural ones, which evolve over centuries to reflect and embody a particular culture's worldview. In a globalizing world, minority languages are often snuffed out, and that's because they're considered politically, economically, and socially less functional. But value isn't always defined by function. Think of everything that you've said today, and how much of that was purely practical communication, and how much of it was culturally fine-tuned expression of your thoughts and feelings and ideas and humor. And can you even separate those two things? So it's more than sounds and symbols. When a language dies with its last speaker, a vast storehouse of human history and accumulated wisdom is rendered inaccessible to the rest of the world and obsolete to its own descendants. Take Marma, which you can see up here. It is a minority language spoken in the Chittagong hill tracts of Bangladesh, along with others like Mro and Chakma. Now, some of its old proverbs translate quite well into English, like drop by drop the pot fills, a word at a time makes a wise man. But what about in jungle scrub, the castor oil tree is king, any knife is keen amongst peen plants? Some don't translate so well because they express such a specific wisdom to that region and culture that it's not about taking single words and finding the English equivalent, if one would even exist. And so the translator of these proverbs, Thomas Lewin, describes his task as transferring a delicately flavored wine from one vessel into another, with nuance being lost along the way. Now, Marma letter forms, they evolved from the Burmese alpha syllabary, which is so circular because it used to be written on palm leaves, which would tear if you made straight lines. It looks exotic to many of us here, but in actuality, it's pretty much just as incomprehensible to those who speak it every day. And that's because formal education is only available in Bangla, which is a language alien to the Hill Tracts children. So imagine showing up on your first day of primary school and your teachers are asking you questions in Icelandic, and you look through your materials and everything's in hieroglyphics, and if there's an image, it's of something that you've never even seen before in real life. Things like trains for these children who live deep in the hill tracts. And because they're able to become alienated quite easily and can't engage with confidence in their schooling, the dropout rate is about 98% by 10th grade. And in that tiny 2%, Mong Nu, a native to the hill tracts, he made it through that system and got to Harvard, where he's currently getting his PhD in education. He's built 3 schools back in the Hill Tracts, which he maintains through his nonprofit Our Golden Hour. You might be thinking now, okay, this is a worthwhile problem, but how are you gonna save a dying language with new logos and promotional pamphlets? And that's understandable reaction, given that graphic design is usually associated with things like selling products and promoting brands. And that's valid, and those are issues that design does tackle brilliantly, as we've all seen. But it's just one application of a really versatile problem-solving approach. But what about this scenario? Well, the thing I love most about design is its multidisciplinary nature. You can apply solid design thinking to nearly any field and pinpoint the essence, augment the impact, and resolve problems. For me, as a chronic dabbler in many things, it's better than having a finger in every pie. It's more like being trained as a taste tester to sample any pie and be able to try and make it taste even better. And that's awesome for me. It's really fun to explore all these different fields through something that I love. But what about this scenario? How was I gonna solve this problem? Because I had to create materials for a language that I didn't know existed a few weeks prior, and it's a dying language, so reference materials are pretty much non-existent. Trying to check something against a fluent speaker in the Hill Tracts would mean a turnaround time of 2 weeks, because there's just no internet access. Government limits that in the Hill Tracts. And I was also nothing close to being an educator, even though I'd been a student all my life. Luckily, my targets were primary level students who couldn't read or write, but I mean, neither could I, so we were pretty much on the same page in this language. I wasn't a teacher or a linguist, but I am a typographic nerd, and so the pleasure I find in a particularly elegant ampersand or perfectly chiseled house number plaque is admittedly ridiculous, but in this case, it gives me a huge advantage, because what we understand about the Roman alphabet, our alphabet, can also be applied to Marma. And so, looking at these letter forms, a designer's eye is meant to break something down, deconstruct it, look at all the different pieces from a different perspective, from an informed perspective, and then start piecing things back together in a way that creates something more functional and more impactful. And so, even though I wasn't able to conduct on-site research for this project, applying this method to the Marma alpha syllabary was able to kind of make sense of their complex systems, that they have all these consonants that you see clustered there, and you can combine those with diacritic marks to form vowels, etc. And so even from my studio desk in London, I was able to sort of analyze their system and create some sort of rudimentary tools for them to use in a curriculum, like alphabet charts and diacritic diagrams, handwriting templates and workbooks, stencils, stroke direction references to show them how to write each letter form. But while I was doodling circles and sunset diagrams and gradients, the Hill Tracts remained a militarized zone. And when I suggested to Mong that we credit contributing teachers and student by name, he had to gently remind me that doing so might put them in real physical danger. And so you can see why I was wary of involving things like color palettes and paper quality, for fear of trivializing the task altogether. I often am haunted by this rather privileged desire to create beautiful things, because design isn't decoration, so why are we so often more afraid of creating something ugly than we are of creating something useless? And placing my work between the context of a sleek design exhibition and rural monasteries in Bangladesh, I grappled with this question a lot. But while there is plenty of truth in the modernist mantra, form follows function, I believe that beauty should not be dismissed, because it's the symbiotic coexistence of purpose and aesthetic that makes design effective. And after all, it's the visual element of graphic design that makes a message as powerful to experience as it is important to communicate. Take these noun posters, for example. They're more playful than instructional, but the children in the hill tracts don't usually get to see their language written in so many different ways. And so by seeing them painted across a page and intertwined, they can kind of celebrate their language in a way that they hadn't before. Because they're grown up being told that Marma, their mother tongue, is a useless language because Bangla is what gets them a job. And though the latter might be true in their system, why do we assume it's Marma that's broken and redundant, rather than the system of cultural hegemony and oppression? In comparison, the whole world caters to my passion. I mean, look around anywhere and you'll see heritage of the Roman alphabet. Even the fact that Comic Sans can be some collective joke in the internet, that's a luxury, it's a privilege, and we should treasure that. I remember speaking to Mong for the first time, and he told me the idea of drop-down menus full of font choices and calligraphic styles, that just didn't seem relevant in the hill tracts, where they couldn't even write their own language. But now, because of his schools and his curriculum, a new generation is able to spell their own name in their own language and compare handwritings. Now, if this seems insignificant at first, just consider that the tapestry of any language is so much more than its vocabulary words. It's your dad's hilarious text messages and your one friend's endless supply of terrible puns. It's that soul-bearing journal you've kept since age 12, and that song lyric's so important that you got it tattooed into your skin. Have you ever heard the pure joy and abandon of a gospel choir worshiping on Sunday? The power of a political leader's speech to the nation after tragedy? The impossible perfection of a Shakespearean sonnet? Think of the centuries of knowledge stacked up right on the shelves of your local library, and what are those things worth? What if tomorrow the threads of that tapestry unraveled and English was rendered incomprehensible? Is it just a matter of translating these things into the next most practical language? Every child in every culture should have the means to perpetuate their mother tongue. They should have a chance to celebrate it, to master it, to create beautiful things with it, and to write their own history with it. Recently, I visited the Aleut people of St. Paul Island, Alaska, where the Unungamtunu language has about 85 speakers remaining, which isn't a lot. And I'm working on a transliteration project with an elder who's extremely knowledgeable and passionate, but because of this relentless race against time, it can be quite debilitating and disheartening at times. And so sometimes the only person in the world, perhaps, that can bring this project into completion and give his own ancestors' language a chance for survival, he becomes so overwhelmed by these pressures and by his age that he starts to forget who I am and what I'm even trying to help with. And so the reality of language revival isn't as romantic and rosy as it might sound on the speech synopsis, and it's about working towards results that you won't fully see in your lifetime, and it's certainly not about color palettes. So I'm not here to insist that Photoshop or great typography can single-handedly save the world, or that they were meant to, but I do believe that there's every reason for us to channel our specific passions and skill sets into the right places, people, projects, all these things that can collectively bring about progress and change. Drop by drop, the bucket fills, and even though we can't always supply the water, resolving a leaky bucket or aiming an unaimed faucet, that can be of great consequence. And that's the definition of design. Thank you.